Welcome to Almost Agreeable.
Almost Agreeable.
With your hosts, Chris Nellison and Ed Harris. Hang around and listen to opinions on sports, movies, music, and whatever else pops in our head.
Okay, welcome back to another episode of the Almost Agreeable podcast. I'm Chris, with me as always is Ed, and today we're going to get back into some music. Well, we've done the 60s, 70s, and 80s at this point. We're going to touch on the 90s today, but first we're going to talk a little bit about guitar legend himself, Eddie Van Halen, who passed away last week, right, after a long battle with cancer.
Yeah, virtuoso. Like, the guy was... I mean, he was classically trained. He knew a lot of classical music, and that's actually a thing that happens a lot with some of these virtuosos, some of these guitarists, is that they are classically trained.
Yeah.
And so they understand all these arpeggios, like music theory. It's not like they're just going out and like, oh, I'll just do this and I'm just shredding. It's just they actually know what they're doing and have studied hundreds of years of music.
And I think it's interesting to me, you talk about him being classically trained. I think a fact that a lot of people don't know is that obviously he's in the band with his brother, Alex, right, the drummer.
Mm-hmm.
But when they were growing up, Alex played guitar and Eddie played the drums. And they both kind of realized that one was better at the other than what they were doing.
Yeah.
And he was like, let's tag out. Let's swap. And then we get what we eventually end up with, which is Van Halen, right? Through a series of lead singers, mainly just the two we have in mind, right? David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar. But, I mean, going back to Eddie, I'll never forget just the sound of Van Halen 1, right? The sound of his guitar. I can't imagine, obviously, not being alive in the 70s when it came out. But I can imagine that it was a different kind of guitar sound that up until that point you didn't really have. I mean, the closest thing I can kind of equivocate it to, as far as like the tone and the sound of the guitar, is just kind of the sounds that Iommi used to make with Black Sabbath. And that's only because it sounded weird because of the way his fingertips were, not human.
He was weird.
It was weird. And so with Eddie, you have like that electric guitar sound that became synonymous with, that hard rock of the 80s. Yeah.
And it's like they kind of took what the 70s were doing and really did make it like hard rock, because like the 70s is, I mean, now classic rock, but at the time was just rock to them. And then they kind of took it and turned it into something a little bit harder. So like they didn't really go like the metal way. I wouldn't say they were metal. I wouldn't say they were any kind of like glam. I wouldn't say they were glam.
No, I couldn't say they were glam either.
I would just say that they kind of took that, just kept going with it, and it was just hard rock at its core.
Right. I mean, you think about probably the shows they played back then and the crowds that would go to them. I know my dad, for instance, for sure, both my parents actually, I've actually seen Van Halen.
Yeah.
So that was actually my first concert, was 2008, Staples Center in LA, Van Halen with David Lee Roth. And, I mean, talk about David Lee Roth another time, but Eddie just still shredding.
Yep. Like nobody's business.
No. So, I mean, it's really sad, obviously, but we can celebrate his life by just continuing to listen to his music, which even in the days of Sammy Hagar was still pretty good.
It wasn't bad.
I can get down with a few songs in the Hagar era, but I'm more of a pre-Hagar Van Halen fan myself.
But I mean, he had some of the most iconic songs, parts. I mean, Eruption, if you just think about that, I mean, like, that's just going right to the top. I understand.
Yeah. I mean, then you can talk about like Cathedral.
Yeah.
And like just like the weird things he did on those albums where there's no other instruments, it's just him doing crazy stuff. I think I had a resurgence of interest in the way he played guitar when I got Van Halen Guitar Hero.
Yeah.
Right. And I had to like start listening to all of it again, because obviously playing Guitar Hero is nothing, right, compared to actually playing the guitar.
Yeah.
But I still get a sense, I'm just like, what the fuck? What?
How?
Yeah.
How?
Yeah.
And then, I mean, we've played it together, and it's always a blast. But he really... we talked about this on the 80s one. Him playing guitar on Beat It. That solo.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Iconic.
That is the perfect word for it. I don't know how else you could describe it, but, like... Imagine, like, knowing that or seeing that, like, these two monsters of their own respective genre
Yeah, their craft.
coming together and making one of the best songs of all time.
Yeah. I guess it's a tribute to the star power of both of them combined. But even if you take away that clout that was with them both, that song has stood the test of time. Anyone in any genre of music, whether they hated pop or, didn't like that kind of stuff, knows that song, can appreciate that Van Halen was playing guitar on it, and realize, like, damn, like, this is... Hey!
This is a bop.
Yeah, that's what it was. And that just, like, is a tribute to his diversity, I guess, right? Because you put yourself in the 80s and be like, yeah, Van Halen, like, almost kind of like a hair metal type of deal, with just in the sense that they play hard rock and they have long hair.
Yeah, that's it.
And
it's basically like I would equate them to, I guess, a similar sound as not quite the same, of course, but as Def Leppard, like not quite metal, just hard rock. That's all it was.
Yep. And then to think about that, and then that what they were playing, what they were doing, what they were known for, and then he comes and does this kind of crossover, which at that time doesn't happen. Like, this is before, like, you have, rappers in the late 90s and early 2000s rapping over rock songs, or, featuring legendary guitarists like that. That wasn't happening a whole lot.
Yeah, when did Walk This Way come out?
Who cares about Aerosmith?
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yep. Not the biggest Aerosmith fan. I guess sorry, I'm not sorry.
Who knows? I can dream on.
The only good thing Steven Tyler ever did was have Liv Tyler as a daughter. That's it.
Jesus, dude.
Yeah.
Aerosmith is good.
Yeah.
Whoa. Like, so you're just going like Aerosmith is bad. Just straight up like, just bad.
Yeah.
Yikes. Okay, we can have a whole thing on this.
Good.
I like that.
Okay.
New topic.
Right. We just kind of piggybacking off of Van Halen, his second part of that band was a stint with Sammy Hagar that went into the 90s, which is kind of a good segue because the music they played into the 90s was, I wouldn't say 100% different, but a lot different than what they were playing when they were with David Lee Roth.
Yeah.
So you bring a kind of more progressive style of rock. Eddie starts dicking with the keyboard a lot more.
Yeah.
Than the guitar.
And Hagar's energy, his vibe is just completely different too.
It is. And it kind of gets drowned out by this new movement we get in the early 90s that's kind of based out of Seattle.
Yeah.
Right? We start getting this grunge.
Yeah.
With the bands that everyone knows today. If you go into Hot Topic, you can find 90 different for Nirvana shirts.
Yep.
In there. And so it's like, you have Nirvana, Pearl Jam came out of that scene, Soundgarden, mainly Chris Cornell, obviously big names in grunge. And then Alice in Chains.
Yeah.
So that movement by itself.
For the longest time, I thought it was Allison Chains.
Really?
Very long time. It's like you would never know unless you actually look at the word.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh yeah, Allison Chains is dope.
I always, when I was a kid, because that was right when I was like a child, and I was always like, someone's in chains. I just kept picturing dudes singing in chains. This is just my warped little young mind that can't comprehend band names. I'm taking it literal.
Good.
But I guess I want to talk about some of the vocalists in that movement, right? Like Chris Cornell, obviously, and Lane Staley, I think, is my favorite vocalist from that movement. And what's the list now? Who's still alive?
Eddie Vedder.
Eddie Vedder. That's it.
That's it.
Because we lost Scott Weiland too.
Yep.
No Lane Staley. Chris Cornell's gone.
Yep.
Protect Eddie Vedder at all costs.
That's all we have left of this couple year grunge movement. It wasn't even the full 90s.
No, I was 93, 94, 95.
It was mid 90s, and that was really it. But it took over. I know I have a lot of friends who really don't like Nirvana or care, like, or they just don't think Nirvana is that good. But it's the same kind of thing as the Beatles. It was just the kind of movement that was started. And it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was started by them, but they all kind of came up together, and Nirvana kind of became the forefront of that because I would say what happened to Kurt Cobain.
Well, they were still big before that.
Yes, they were.
But the cult following his death, whether you want to call it a suicide or a murder, that's a conversation for a different time. Following his death, obviously the cult following grows exponentially.
Yeah.
He becomes immortalized because also he was 27. He's part of that club.
Yep.
And so I can see what you're saying there, but also I feel like while he was still alive, they were still kind of the poster boys for that grunge movement.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I can agree with you, too. I don't think they were that good either. It's all about what they were doing and the new shift in what was popular or in pop culture at that time.
It was kind of that Gen X, just not as self-deprecating as like the newer generations or anything, but it was just kind of like realizing like the world is on their shoulders, and grunge kind of hit them with that and was just like it's something they could all relate to.
Right. There's a lot of whining and complaining.
Yeah.
And that's what. Hey, I'm feeling that. I
Yep.
can get on that train.
Yep.
And that's just kind of where we get that, and probably why it exploded so big. But I mean, I don't know. I think if we're gonna say like the movement is what Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains. I think the most successful, or maybe just my favorite of that group, is I said Lane Staley's my favorite vocalist from it, but like Chris Cornell, I think endured the most. I mean, Pearl Jam, you can make an argument because Eddie Vedder's still alive.
Anybody? Yeah.
But just what Chris Cornell had went on to do after that, right? He has stints with Audioslave and solo projects, and was an influence on a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, you get bands coming out in the early 2000s that are directly influenced by these guys, particularly Chris Cornell.
Yeah, and I really do enjoy the grunge sound and feel and everything to it too. It just has such like a nostalgic vibe to it. Like every time you listen to it, I feel like it just puts you in a certain mood or a specific time in your life even. Yeah,
that's so accurate, because you could play a Nirvana song or a Pearl Jam song, and it does take me back to when 6, 7-year-old Chris running around singing songs he had no idea what the hell they meant, thinking someone's in chains, thinking how gardens are making sounds. I don't know, just being weird, but can place myself in that and be like, yeah, I dug that music when I was a child, and I can appreciate it today as an adult.
Yeah.
Who else we got from the 90s, man?
I mean, well, the 90s really, like, as we're going on with music, we keep talking about more and more, and it's harder and harder to fit, everybody that we would want to talk about in an episode. But, like, the 60s, of course, there's still a plethora of artists. I mean, going back to the 40s, 30s, there's still, like, a plethora of artists. But picking up in the 60s, that's when it becomes a little bit more iconic, and you can
pick out these movements.
But now it's getting harder to do that because the more we go on, the wider the scope of music just becomes.
Right.
And so, like, I mean, in the 90s, like, in the 80s, we talked about it in the last music episode that rap was coming in.
Find its footing.
Yeah. Like, you had the Sugar Hill Gang, you had and the start of NWA, you had Public Enemy. So you had some of these groups that were fantastic. I feel like the 90s just it took that to another level.
Right.
Like, you had NWA in the beginning of that, but then you also had them break away and then do all their solo stuff.
Right, you have Dre.
Yeah.
You have Ice Cube. You have Eazy-E. I mean, the crazy thing to think about is, like, yeah, we get NWA, we get all these guys together for a kind of a short period of time.
Honestly, yeah.
And then they all go out and do their own things, and they kind of become like the forefathers of rap, like really, really making it, like being a staple in the music scene. Because then you get Dre, and then Dre's finding all these other people. I mean, Dre eventually finds Eminem.
And he just becomes a producer, like, and Dre is pinnacle to the game. Like, he has some really good songs. He does have some good albums and lyrics, but he is pinnacle to what he's shaped rap a lot
Right.
today.
Because he also finds Snoop. You get Tupac coming out in the 90s.
Yeah.
Notorious B.I.G.
Yeah.
You know, and this is back when it was Puff Daddy.
Yeah.
Not P. Diddy or Diddy, where the hell he goes by
he's
nowadays.
had too many names.
Yeah, what the hell?
But yeah, it just, like, even, I mean, literally, we just talked about NWA and talked about, like, 4 or 5 different things about them. And that's just NWA. And then you talk about Biggie and Tupac, and it starts this whole East Coast, West Coast thing.
Right. And we see violence, like, legit violence.
Yeah, like, of course, there's always been gang violence, but now it's, like, about music.
Yeah.
It's brought into, music is brought into the violence, and violence is brought into the music.
Right. And so, you end up, Tupac gets killed. Biggie gets killed. Which happened first? Tupac died first, right? I've actually been to that corner, Flamingo and Koval, many times. It's not that far from the fucking strip, man.
It's really not.
It's right there.
It's, yeah.
Like, dude probably just left. I don't know where he's coming from, but he probably was just on the strip, drove up, like, not even a quarter mile, and then was, bang, you're dead.
It was right there, yeah.
So, and then Biggie, of course, passes away.
And, yeah, and so you have those two, and they just spark, they really sparked a lot of, I mean, the progress that we're seeing today, and, like, but even before that, we had, A Tribe Called Quest, who was just kind of, like, it was hip-hop. It was hip-hop, and I love A Tribe Called Quest. And in the same time frame, you also have Nas. Who, like, I think, I know this, okay, so this kind of works in tandem, okay? Because you're saying the best debut album all time is Van Halen.
Whoa. Can you, before you continue, I think I know you're going with this, because I think that, I know you're going with this. I just want to say that Illmatic is probably the greatest rap album of all time. Okay, go ahead.
Okay,
okay, go ahead.
That's it. I do think Illmatic is the greatest debut album of all time.
Well, here's the crazy thing, is that, like, it's so wild to me. You said that as soon as you start bringing up Van Halen, because I do think that Van Halen is the greatest debut album of all time. But then it's like we talked about earlier, how it just gets so big. The genres just keep kind of getting bigger and being mainstays, and I kind of forget. Like, I don't think I can classify greatest debut album genre-wide.
It's hard.
Yeah. So, like, as far as rap albums, not even just the greatest debut album of all time, the greatest rap album of all time, Illmatic. The greatest debut album, I'm still going to stick with Van Halen 1. I have to. And that's, I don't even think about it. You're right. In fact, now I'm going to have to fight with myself.
It's hard. Like, that's what we've been saying. Like, music just expands. And I mean, we even get into different, like, kinds of groups. Like, then we have a bunch of this alternative. Like, the 90s, honestly, is, like, when Pantera took hold. And that's, like, alternative metal.
Right.
And so we just have all of these different types of alternative bands. Like, we have Sublime, we have Rage Against the Machine, we have Pantera, and it's just different types of music. And
right, Counting Crows.
Yeah, it's harder to classify it. Like, what do you classify each of these bands as? Because they're kind of this and they're kind of that.
And, like, while this is going on, you still have Ozzy making music in his solo. As Ozzy.
Yeah.
And that music's still doing good. So, yeah, the 90s is an odd decade of music.
Yeah. And
it's just so broad. And I'm just so glad that I can appreciate all these different genres. I guess the only genre I'm not ever going to talk about is probably country.
Yeah, that doesn't really have a place on our podcast except for Johnny Cash.
Which, that's another conversation for another time. Let's not do that.
Johnny Cash is country. But, so who would you say in the 90s, like, are there any, I have one in my head, but solo artists, pop artists? Because I know we've been talking about basically everything but pop.
Right.
Because, like, that's usually what we're going with is, like, bands, or now we're into rap, so that's individual artists. Right. But, like, now talking about pop.
Well, I mean, I guess Madonna and Prince are still making music. So is Michael.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's all still happening. God, this decade is so rich
with
music.
It's expansive.
Solo artists. I mean, fuck. I probably, because I'm on the spot, can't think of anything, but you're going to say the one that's in your head, and I'm going to be like, oh, yeah, of course.
I mean, maybe not, but I was thinking of...
Britney Spears.
Yeah, right at the end of the 90s, she came on the scene. That's not who I'm thinking of, but it is another female.
Christina Aguilera.
Nope. Mariah Carey.
Mariah Carey! Bro, God, it's almost fucking Christmas, and we're going to have to hear this woman.
Oh, fuck, you're right.
All the time. It's coming. Christmas is coming.
That's more ominous than winter is coming.
It really is.
God, I'm so...
When you put it in that regard.
Like, there are probably, I would say, 2 to 3 times a year when that song plays, and I fucking love it, though.
Probably the first 2 or 3 times.
It's the first... It's never the first time. It's never the first time. Because I remember and I'm like, oh, fuck this song. But it's probably a couple times later I'll hear him like, hell yeah, all I want for Christmas is you.
Do you remember when we went to Leavenworth for the lighting festival? And it was like snowing and we were really drunk. We were drinking all those... we kept getting growlers.
Oh, yeah.
We had like 5 growlers between like... Only 3 of us were drinking.
Yeah, it got... Yeah.
That was one of those times when that song came on and I was hype about it.
And it was a banger.
It was so good.
It was one of the best things.
I was actually enjoying it that time. So I can roll with that. Mariah Carey, yes, 90s. That was her decade, really.
Yeah, straight up. I mean, like, she had some hits after that, but like she tore it up in the 90s. Mm-hmm. That was all her.
Yeah. And then like you get Britney and Christina because of Mariah, probably.
Yeah.
And then we also have boy bands in the 90s.
Damn it, that's what I was going to say next. It was locked in my head for the next thing.
I wanted to bring it up before you brought up solo artists. So I was just waiting to get to fucking... I mean, Backstreet Boys, obviously. I mean, I have no fucking shame. I don't care. Say what you will. I'll get down to some Backstreet Boys and some NSYNC.
Everybody... No, but honestly...
I really wish we had video so everyone could see my face.
Like, we've had male groups before.
Right.
We've had male groups before, but it's not quite the same as what the 90s brings to the table. These boy bands are a completely different breed. I mean, you have like... I wouldn't say Boys to Men is a boy band, but I would say like...
R&B, like artists, like...
Yeah, but like 98 Degrees.
98 Degrees.
Why the fuck can I not think it? Something on the Block. New Kids on the Block.
New Kids on the Block. That's
80s.
It's
80s, but it really did lead the way.
Who is the boy group that sang about...
NSYNC and Backstreet Boys is like the shit.
There was also another one. They had like one hit, and part of the chorus was New Kids on the Block. And it's like... hold on. I really want to... Yeah. Yeah. New Kids on the Block.
Yeah.
Chinese
for the summer.
Makes me
for the
sick.
summer.
LFO.
Yes.
Yes. They had that one song and they were just gone.
And that was it. That was the whole thing.
We had Spice Girls in the 90s, bro.
Oh, shit. You're right. You ever watch Spice World?
Maybe when I was, like, young as fuck.
Dude, I watched the shit out of Spice World. That is a dope-ass movie. Can
we get drunk and watch it?
Yeah.
I can't remember anything about it.
Yeah, we can do that. Spice World is an OG. Like, can't be replaced.
Can you name all the 5 Spice Girls?
Scary Spice, Sporty Spice, Baby Spice,
Posh, that's all.
Posh Spice,
Ginger Spice,
and Ginger Spice.
Ginger Spice was my jam.
Fucking nailed it. Next question.
Okay, I want you to name all the band members of Backstreet Boys.
Oh no.
Oh no.
I've got nothing. I don't know, honestly. I honestly don't even remember which one Justin Timberlake was in. But I know there is a Lance Bass.
That's NSYNC.
Okay. I know there's a Joey Fatone.
That's NSYNC.
And there's a Justin Timberlake.
That's NSYNC.
Oh shit.
You're naming NSYNC.
Oh my god. Okay.
You're missing a couple, but those are like the 3 main.
Oh shit. Okay. I don't know who the fuck's in Backstreet Boys then.
Isn't it like Nick Carter?
Oh.
No, that's the brother.
Aaron Carter.
No, that's the brother. Nick Carter's in Backstreet Boys. Aaron Carter's his little brother who had like a little side project.
You're right. I want candy, dude.
Get the fuck out. God, this is taking me back to the 90s.
Oh man. We're going on a...
And then 98 Degrees had the dude who was married to Jessica Simpson. Nick Lachey.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
But I mean, boy bands.
Boy bands.
You love them, you hate them. Boy bands change the world.
Yeah. If you're all ever in the mood to like listen to some 90s like bangers and have some beer while you're doing that, I suggest going on YouTube. There's a video on there. It's 90s Power Hour. Okay, if you ever played Power Hour, probably don't if you're my age, but also play Power Hour while listening to that playlist on YouTube. There's like a minute for each song. They play a clip of it, and it's all 90s bangers. and like half of them are NSYNC and Backstreet Boys.
Yeah.
And it's by the time you get to them, you gotta drink a beer the whole time. Feel it.
You're vibing.
Vibing.
You're vibing the whole time. But it's the same thing. It's the specific age group that we were in. Like, you can look back and think like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna always vibe to that. And that could be this. It's kind of the same thing as like newer generations and like Justin Bieber.
What?
I would say it is the same thing.
Can we use like a different example?
Like.
Can we just not go there? Can we just keep talking about the 90s? Because Eminem was in the 90s, right? We call that deflection.
Barely. He released his
Hi, My Name Is.
He released his Slim Shady LP in 99.
99, cool, we're count it.
Count it. Okay. We're really saving it for the 2000s.
Because all his mixtape stuff though is when Dre found him, that's all like 90s.
That's 90s.
That's 8 Mile Eminem.
That's true.
Like actually still living in 8 Mile Eminem.
Yes.
And that kind of starts like rap as we kind of know it today. Like, because and then what I mean by that is like when you listen to like NWA, Dre, Cube, Eazy-E, Nas, those guys, it's about like where they grew up and how hard it was coming up in their environment and stuff like that.
It's a poetic story.
Right. And then with Eminem comes on the scene, he kind of hits all that, but also just is talking shit about everyone and just being vulgar and fucking terrible, and I loved it.
It's a different style that we haven't seen before, because like, of course, that's like in the 90s, it's like, oh my god, rap is the devil because they're talking about this stuff, they're talking about gangs and drugs and killing, and Eminem is talking about his life as well, but it has a lot of humor to it, and it's a completely different vibe than what people are used to listening to. Like, it's still very real, but people
we can get into that when we get to the 2000s, really. I guess you're right. It was just on the cusp of the new millennium. So, we can save Eminem for the next decade, but... Yeah. And so, like, just so much is going on, like, I know we've left out some. You think of any? Like, I mean, we hit heavy hitters like we usually do in these episodes, and I feel bad when I look back in retrospect when, I listen to the episode, I'm like, oh, we didn't even talk about these guys. Like, who are we not talking about?
There's always somebody we missed. I mean, like, we literally said the names Britney Spears, Rage Against the Machine, and Sublime.
Green Day.
Green Day, yeah. Green Day. But, like, it's all of those bands and artists are all iconic, but it's hard to get all of those people into, this time slot and be able to talk about them extensively.
And that's the biggest thing is, like, because if we brought up all these bands, I'd want to talk about them with so much depth, and this is impossible for us to do.
And I guess it's really we're just talking about the 90s, It's not like we're focused on one band or the other. It's really, we're just covering the 90s, and, of course we had to start out talking about grunge. Like, you have to. That's the 90s.
The 90s, yes.
Yeah, that is the 90s, so it's hard to not just immediately go there. But then we have a lot of pop, like, coming out, and boy bands, and then we have alternative.
And that's like the child of grunge, right? You get grunge, and then it evolves into this alternative, and you get bands like Green Day and Matchbox 20 and those guys.
Yeah. Oh.
Well, I could talk about the 90s forever, but I guess I would really like to hear kind of hot routes you got for me.
All right, I got some hot routes. Hot route. Everybody's favorite segment.
It's definitely mine.
All right, so for our first hot route, it's a 3-parter.
Okay.
It's a 3-parter.
Yeet.
Just let me ask it, and then think about it, and then, get to it. So, Eddie Van Halen is a god. Personally to you, all right, this is 3 parts. Personally to you, what is your favorite solo of his? What do you think his best solo is? And then, which solo do you think is the most iconic? And maybe not even solo, just a favorite riff or song or solo.
I'm going to start with most iconic. His most iconic riff is Running with the Devil.
Yeah.
Like, step away from just the beginning but like just the riff for the entire song is iconic enough. Like, when you hear that, it's Van Halen by his sound. You know, that's one of their biggest songs. It was on their debut album.
It's the first song on their debut album.
Yeah,
like,
and so
it starts out his legacy.
That for me is most iconic. And then the other two were my favorite, and then his best. His best solo is probably Eruption.
Yeah.
And like, it is in all intents and purposes, it's a solo, but on the debut album, it's just like a song.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
You get to it and it's just Eruption, and it's just him.
It's pure shredding.
Right. And my favorite is gotta be Somebody Get Me a Doctor.
Ooh, very good.
Somebody Get Me a Doctor, which is on Van Halen 2, if I'm not mistaken.
I was not thinking you were going to... What I had in my head, what I thought you were going to go with was Atomic Punk.
Okay, no, that I crossed my mind. I swear, because I was just going to tell you before you said that, like, it could be Atomic Punk.
All right.
But it's Someone Get Me a Doctor, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that when they fucking played that when I saw them,
oh, yeah.
it was amazing.
Yeah.
And never have I seen my dad get so into a fucking show and screaming, "Somebody get me a doctor." But then, just listening to it on the studio, like on the album, it's also great. I love that solo. It's a great solo, and then to hear it live, just kind of, that cements it as my favorite.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. All right, so for Hot Route number 2, we've been talking about, like, how wide the music really spans, like, how it just keeps growing and growing and growing. So would you say, is there... like that there is a most or extremely influential band or artist or anybody in the 90s? Like if you had to pick, is there a, like, this is the 90s?
Well, I mean, an easy answer would be to say grunge and any of those bands. So I'm gonna step away from that, because you have a band in the 90s, Sublime, who goes on to influence like this reggae rock rap for until today. Like, my favorite band today is the Dirty Heads.
Yeah.
So, they still play shows with Sublime, with Rome. They're on tour with those guys a lot. But then you get bands like Revolution and Slightly Stupid.
Pepper.
There's one more that I can't fucking think of their name.
But I mean, there's whole festivals dedicated to this style of music.
Right, and that's what I'm saying essentially, is like, if it's not grunge, which is an easy answer, obviously, I don't want to take an easy out. It's Sublime because of everything. Like, Bradley also immortalized because he's dead.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely Sublime for sure from the 90s.
Oh yeah, I dig it. That's a good answer. Wasn't expecting that. So, like, we've been talking about, now 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Like, 60s, you could say Beatles. 70s, Led Zeppelin. 80s, Michael Jackson. 90s, now, Sublime. And so that's just, the specific artists that you could associate with these decades. But we also know that, like, drugs are pretty synonymous with music. So what would you say the 60s are? Like, let's go through all the decades, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Like, what drug of choice would you say is the 60s?
Okay. In the 60s, it's marijuana.
Straight up?
Straight up.
Okay.
Because 70s is psychedelics.
Okay.
It's like shrooms, LSD.
See, I would swap those.
Yeah, well, because you could say psychedelics for both decades.
They kind of were.
Yeah.
They kind of were.
But I generally, because the 60s are the tamest of uses.
Okay.
So then when we get to the 70s, it's more accepted in the rock star lifestyle. Okay, and then when we get to the 80s, it's very obvious. It's cocaine.
Okay. That's it's naturally.
Cocaine. And then the 90s is heroin.
The 90s is...
The 90s is fucking heroin.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's through the decades.
It's
like a world tour of drugs.
It's a world tour of drugs. Like, you're just getting high through the decades.
Yeah. Oh, very nice. Very good.
Had to finish out with a fun one.
All right. Well, that was fun. I love talking about music. We got the 2000s coming eventually, but really good time to reflect on one of my personal favorite guitarists, Eddie Van Halen, and then talk about the genre of music I grew up in.
Yeah.
I am a 90s kid. You're a 90s kid too. So a lot of that music that we talked about just now, what we grew up listening to, kind of influenced the way we listen to music and who we listen to, in 2020.
Yeah, it really is, like, just guides us, like, what we used to listen to as kids. It's gonna shape what we want to listen to or are used to listening to now.
Yeah. So, as always, I'm Chris.
I'm Ed.
This has been Almost Agreeable. Thank you for listening to another episode of Almost Agreeable. You can catch all new episodes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like, rate, and subscribe. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Almost Agreeable.